This video is going to be looking at two different sections within the source book because they're both quite short. So it's going to be looking at the early treatment of the Allies, the Athenian allies, and also a little bit of the interwar period between the First Peloponnesian War and the Second Peloponnesian War. So this video is going to look at a short section of Aristotle, something called the Chalcas Decree, varying sections of Thucydides, and a couple sections of Plutarch. So these early examples of the treatment of Athenian allies is occurring during the First Peloponnesian War. There's no more explanation than that, to be honest. They cover a couple of places. So if we look at the Aristotle source first, so we have those in positions of power do the same, i.e. weaken their rivals. So that's quite a nice broad quote for the treatment of allies in general. So with Athens, they're acting like an empire. They control their allies. They have no real say in what they can do. And then there's a few examples it gives as well as the Athenians as regard to Samos, Chios and Lesbos, for as soon as they had a firm hold over their empire, they humbled these islands. So again, these guys all tried to leave the Delian League, and the Athenians all forced them back in again. So when we talked about with Naxos and Thasos, that the Delian League in theory is voluntary, you can join, you're allowed to leave under the terms of the treaty. However, Athens had obviously forced these guys back into the league, and it happens again with these three islands as well. So there's a bit of a pattern of behaviour here going on. So then we have what's called the Chalcas Decree. So these decrees are written by the Athenians, and they are put up in public. So this one will tell you where it's going to go, but essentially it goes on the island about who it's about, and also one goes up in Athens. And they can be dotted around the empire. So obviously this is the Athenian view of the situation. We don't have the response from the island that it's talking about. So that is a bit of an issue for us in looking at the source. These ones, because they're also written in stone, we can lose sections of it, although this one's in pretty good condition. So we have pretty much most of the wording of it. Obviously, it's used to kind of tell the empire how to behave, because, we attacked this place and look what happened to them. This could happen to you as well. So this Chalcas Decree is, funnily enough, about a place called Chalcas. So this is an island who had revolted from the Delian League. The Athenians went in and basically put down the revolt, and then this decree comes up afterwards. And it gives you a really good insight into how Athens viewed their allies at this particular time. So we have the council and the people deciders. Remember, this is the Council of 500, so that's the bull, and the people, talking about the ecclesia or the assembly in Athens. So it's the people in Athens that have decided this. Now these decrees always tell you about who was the lead archon and all this sort of stuff at the time, and it gets a bit confusing to follow, so we're going to skip over bits. But the important thing is the Athenians say, we will not expel Chalcidians from Chalcas, nor will I uproot their city. I will deprive no individual of civic rights. So they're sort of saying, we will treat you really, really well. We're not exile anybody, we won't execute anybody, blah, 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 unless that is the decision of the Athenian people. So the Athenians have complete control over the life and death of the people living on Chalcas. So that kind of shows you the level of power that Athens has over their allies at this particular time. And they basically say there's going to be an oath where it will simply say, well, we'll go into a bit more detail, I will maintain this while the Chalcidians obey the Athenian people. The key thing here is the word obey. These guys are completely controlled by the Athenians. And there's going to be an embassy from Chalcas, and they will administer the oath to the Athenians. So the Chalcidians have to literally swear a public oath that they will be good. And this is where this section talks you through the oath. So I will not revolt from the people of Athens by any means or device whatever, neither in word or deed. I will pay to the Athenians whatever tribute I persuade them to agree. I will be the best and fairest ally I am able to be, and will help and defend the Athenian people. So they're not allowed to revolt. They're not even allowed to think about revolting. If they do see anyone who revolts, they must sort of denounce them. They will pay whatever tribute they're forced to pay. It says which we agree, but it will be whatever Athens decides. And they will help and defend the Athenian people. So they will send troops and ships, etc., to help them in battles. This isn't, this is a very one-sided agreement here. This is not the Athenians treating this particular place very well. You don't have an ally make them swear an oath to you. That's very much an empire kind of behaviour. It says, if anyone who does not swear, he is to be deprived of his civic rights and his property is to be confiscated. So you're not allowed to not swear, because if you do, you're basically kicked off the island. And then these decrees then go through what's discussed at different parts of in the assembly and in the council. So most of it we don't need to worry about particularly. It kind of says how they're going to deal with the oath being sworn. They point out the foreigners who live in Chalkis and do not pay taxes to Athens, so these guys will be metics. Even if they've been given a tax exemption by the Athenian people, should pay taxes in Chalkis along with the rest. So these guys are no longer exempt from some taxes. So again, it's about control. So not only is it the Chalcidians under control, it's the foreigners living in Chalcis, that are forced to sort of be loyal to Athens. So the decree Anophis is put on a stone stele, so that's like a big monument, and it's set up at the Acropolis at the expense of the Chalcidians. So the Chalcidians don't have to pay for the oath to be inscribed. The Athens is, just telling them what to do. They've got no choice in this situation whatsoever. And basically they're saying, in general terms, the Chalcidians should look after themselves, but of there's some key matters that involve any Athenians, there should be a reference to Athens to the court. So even their law courts start to come under the control of the Athenians. So this is typical imperialistic behaviour from Athens. These guys are no longer allies, they are subjects because they have to swear an oath, which is very different from when the league was initially set up. We then have a few examples of, again, where Athens goes in during the Peloponnesian War, attacking allies who decide that they want to leave, or just attacking other places. So there's some Boeotians causing some problems. So the Athenians marched against city strongholds of 1,000 men and contingents from their allies. So again, we've got examples of allies having to fight with them. And they captured this place, and they made slaves of the inhabitants. So that's, again, quite imperialistic behaviour. They then made a treaty by which they got back their prisoners at the price of evacuating the whole of Boeotia. So there'd been like another battle in between. Another group came in and had managed to defeat the Athenians. So the Athenians are forced out of the Boeotian area. Well, not the Boeotian area, sorry, this place. And they're forced to sign this kind of peace treaty. And the exile party of the Boeotians came back into power, and everybody regains their independence. So this isn't a very big success. Initially, the Athenians do really well. Then there's another battle, and then they're forced out of a particular area. At around about the same time, Euboea is another island in the Delian League, revolts from Athens, and another place called Megara also revolts. Now Megara goes a little bit a step further. They join the Peloponnesian League and they destroy the Athenian garrisons at the same time. And in order to make sure they are protected, they called in the aid of Corinth, Scione, and Epidaurus. This is going to be an issue later on in the Peloponnesian War. So when we say about allies pushing for conflict, this is a good example because Megara asks other places to come and help them. What we also have going on at the same time, so we've got Euboea's revolting, Megara leaves, and then the Peloponnesians, these are the Spartans, come up under the command of this guy here. They start invading Attica. Attica is the surrounding lands of Athens, and they lay waste to the country, and then they go home again. This is kind of like the Spartans' military plan initially during the Peloponnesian War. Ravage the land and then go home. Now obviously if you're ravaging the land, that's all the farmlands around Athens, so that's going to cause some massive economic hardships for those farmers, but also in terms of Athens getting food, they're going to have to also import more food, so that's a bit of an issue. However, the Athenians, under the command of Pericles, so we've talked about him last lesson in college, crossed over again into Euboea and subdued the whole island. So Euboea again is brought back under control, and it's all kind of sorted. Now, around this sort of time, the Athenians and the Spartans have kind of really started to have enough of war. They're both getting quite, exhausted militarily and economically. And they decide they need to have a peace treaty because this war has been going on for up to this point for nearly 20 years. And remember, the war's going on all over the place. So the bits in the source book only cover a few examples. There's skirmishes everywhere. So they're all a bit stretched. They decide they want to have peace. And there are different reasons for the peace. So the official reason is obviously that these guys are tired. There is also this accusation about the Spartan king that he was being bribed to leave Attica and the surrounding lands, and that's the reason why there is a peace treaty. And this is further backed up by Plutarch Pericles, where it says, Pericles has an entry of 10 talents as was needed in his account of expenditures, and no one really questioned it, but they didn't really know what it was for. And then there's this philosopher here who states that Pericles had 10 talents sent annually to Sparta and he deferred the war. So maybe Athens was bribing Sparta to sort of end this war and have a peace treaty. Don't know. Who knows the actual truth? I certainly don't. So then we have this little bit of the interwar period. So we have a peace treaty signed in 446. And I realised in lesson I wrote 440 in terms of the First Peloponnesian War. It's Friday, it was before half time, I was quite tired, my apologies. It should be 446. So there's a peace treaty, and in the treaty, the Athenians, it's 30 years, and Sparta and their allies are going to have certain parts of the agreement for each other, and we'll go through this in lesson in a lot more detail. So Athens is to give up these places, which they'd taken from the Peloponnesians. And that's the key thing, is that places are basically exchanged and given back to each other. During the peace time, there is an issue in Samos. Before I talk about Samos, I will point out now that this section of the source book here, 1.35, is in completely the wrong place. I'm really sorry. This here, if I highlight it red, should actually be all the way down here. I don't know why I've done that, so that should be in here. So when I do the video on the next bit, I will transfer that source down here. So for now, we're going to come back to this. In fact, I'll do it in front of you so you know I'm not deleting it. Cut and paste. It's very exciting to watch on a video, I'm sure. There we go. So we will come back to this source. We're not deleting it. You do need to read it, just not yet. And I've just put it in the wrong place. So I thought, do it in front of you so you can see it happening. Anyway. So as I said, there is a problem in Samos. So in the 6th year of the peace treaty, there is a war between Samos and Miletus over this question of this another place. As it always is, always a question of somewhere else. And the Milesians come to Athens and they lodge complaints against the Samians. So that's the people from Samos. So remember we talked about, I've said this a couple of times, about allies pushing for conflict. Here's an example here where Miletus goes to Athens and says, please come help us against Samos because they're being a pain. And they also have some private individuals from Samos who want to set up a different form of government. So there was an oligarchy in Samos initially. So the Athenians sailed to Samos and set up a democracy. So we have here some contradicting evidence about the importance of political ideologies. So remember, political ideologies is oligarchy versus democracy, and whether or not the conflict between the two led to war. So if Samos was an oligarchy and was within the Delian League, well, Athens is a democracy, so clearly it would appear they don't really care that they are an oligarchy. So that's like a counter saying, no, it's not about political ideologies. However, when there's some people from Samos wanting to set up a democracy, they do go and set up a democracy. So maybe it is about political ideologies after all. Don't know. A lot of this is about contradictory evidence. Is that an opportunity for Athens? Possibly. Did they really want to go into establish a democracy? Well, they weren't bothered by the oligarchy in the first place. So, anyway. So, there's a democracy set up in Samos, and the Athenians then go home. But there are still some Samians, some people from Samos still there. They went to the mainland and they start to talk to the reading oligarchs who were still in the city, and they make an alliance with a Persian governor. I told you the Persians wouldn't stay out of it for very long. And they send up some troops. They raise some troops to go back to Samos, and then they attack the Democratic Party and imprison most of the leaders. At the same time, Byzantium joins a revolt in Athens. So just to recap what's happened with Samos and these guys are arguing over here. The Milesians, that's not the right word, Milesians, come to Athens to complain about Samos. There appears to be sort of a group in Samos who wants a democracy, so Athens goes to Samos, sets up the democracy, then Athens goes. There are still some oligarchs in Samos. They make an alliance with a Persian governor. They then attack the democracy and basically re-establish the oligarchy. And then Byzantium joins in the revolt. Hopefully you're with me so far. Then the story continues with the rest of the revolt. So then the Athenians hear about this and they sail with Samos with another 60 ships. And they're basically going to deal with the situation. 44 ships stay under the command of Pericles, and 9 others go off to another island and have a bit of a fight. And the victory is Athenians at this particular point. Hopefully it's all making perfect sense so far. They build 3 walls to blockade the city, which has already been blockaded from the sea. So one of the key things you have to look at is the way conflicts are ended. So besieging is one of them. So here's a really nice example of the Athenians besieging. Pericles then takes some ships and he sails away to here. So I will highlight that because it's a bit confusing, this Samos stuff. So Pericles goes off and he goes to go and tackle someone else. While he is away, the people of Samos put to sea a surprise attack, and they attack the Athenians who were left behind, and destroy the ships, and they defeat them. So these are the oligarchs in Samos. Pericles soon returns, and then again starts to blockade them. And then he's reinforced by the commands of 3 people, Thucydides, as in Thucydides. Our other key person is a guy called Phormio, which is a brilliant name. And he also has 30 ships from Chios and Lesbos. Lesbos, I will point out, is an island quite near Samos from memory. I might be wrong, my geography is a bit rubbish. So, essentially, after 9 months siege, the oligarchs in Samos are forced to pull down the walls. They give hostages, they hand over the fleet, and they agree to pay reparations. So we have a lot of examples here of either causes of conflict. Obviously, we have allies coming to help each other, causing a battle. We also got examples of how battles were ended, or sort of conflict was ended through besieging. We've also got maybe an element of the Athenian motives for causing conflict. So obviously we've got an example where it's imperialism. Samos tries to, essentially the second revolt is trying to leave the league because they want to be an oligarchy, and it fails. The fact that they hand over their fleet and pay reparations show that maybe there's a desire for wealth and resources as well. So remember I talked in lesson, there's lots of these examples of places can be used in multiple different ways. It's a blessing and a curse. We have to look at lots of different examples, but you can pick your favourite ones, the ones you understand the best, and use them in different places. As long as within an essay you don't necessarily use the same evidence, but you can use the same place to prove more than one theme, that's absolutely fine. And I am all for you reducing the amount of kind of source evidence and examples you have to learn, because I appreciate there is a huge amount of stuff that we have to cover. And then just to reiterate what happened in Samos, Plutarch says it really nicely. 9th month, the Samians surrounded, Pericles pulls down the walls, took all their ships, and Partial line's fine. And then there's a little bit of discussion about whether Pericles did something else, but to be completely honest, it doesn't really go anywhere, so I wouldn't bother highlighting it because I didn't bother. And that is essentially it for the interwar period. So the next video, as you can see, is going to start talking about the causes of the war in 431. So we'll talk in more detail about this interwar period in lesson, about the peace treaty of 446, and whether or not it was sort of led. That's what I'm looking for. Whether it was like doomed to fail, because that's kind of like one of the questions we have to answer. If you're a bit confused by the Samos stuff, I'm pretty certain the task for half term is going to talk about it in a bit more detail, but I would certainly do a little flow diagram about Samos just to clarify what on earth has happened. And remember, the Samos stuff starts up here and then carries on to that particular section of the source book.